June 11, 1979. A seasoned traffic cop waved at a local farmer, pulled her cruiser onto a quiet dirt road and vanished. No trace, no struggle, just the hum of wind and the ticking of unanswered radios. 15 years later, a patrol car surfaced from the bottom of a swamp. Inside it, something was still strapped in the driver's seat. Before we dive into this twisted mystery, like this video, subscribe and turn on notifications, because sometimes the stories buried deepest are the ones no one wants uncovered. The officer who never came back. Her name was Teresa Molina, a 34-year-old patrol officer from the small town of El Paraiso, New Mexico. Known for her discipline, her precision, and her silence, she wasn't flashy, she wasn't reckless, she was just dependable. Teresa had run the same traffic loop every morning for nearly 6 years. Her beat covered Route 11 and the winding stretch near Corazon Swamp, a place locals avoided due to flooding wildlife and its eerie stillness. On that Monday morning, Teresa signed into her shift at 5:58 a.m. She logged her position at 6:15, then she was gone forever. No sign, no sound. By 8:00 a.m., Teresa missed her first check-in. At 8:45, another officer drove her loop. No cruiser, no tire marks, no sign of her. The call went out. Within hours, search parties were organized. The National Guard was called in, helicopters buzzed across the marshes. The swamp was combed by divers for days, water levels were dragged, locals lent airboats and dogs. Nothing. Her car, a department-issued 1977 Plymouth Fury, seemed to have evaporated. So did Teresa. A flood of questions. Her disappearance became the biggest law enforcement mystery the town had ever faced. Rumors took over. Had she run away with someone? Did she discover something she shouldn't have? Was there a secret in her past? But there were no clear answers. Teresa had no criminal contacts, no debts, no romantic entanglements, just a few coworkers who admired her and one Ray Gutierrez who'd reportedly been too fond of her. But Ray had an alibi and no one had evidence. By 1981, the case went cold. A memorial plaque was installed at the station entrance. Her badge was retired and the swamp remained quiet. 15 years later, September 3, 1994, heavy rains flooded much of Corazon Swamp, sending tides backward into old creek beds. When the water receded, something strange was left behind the roof of a car just poking above the surface, coated in algae and silt. 2 hikers saw it and called the authorities. When recovery crews arrived, they couldn't believe it. It was a police cruiser, the Model A 1977 Plymouth Fury. Its paint, long metal, corroded, but the markings were still faintly visible. Inside the driver's seat, the remains of a woman, still in uniform, still buckled in. ID confirmed what they feared. It was Teresa Molina. Part 2. What the swamp preserved. The car was pulled from the thick mud and waterlogged moss with care. What surprised investigators wasn't just the fact that it had survived, but what was still inside. Despite years submerged in the acidic swamp, Officer Teresa Molina's body was remarkably preserved. Not intact, but preserved, enough to raise questions, enough to raise chills. Her seatbelt was still locked, her hands skeletal but still clenched on the steering wheel, her jaw broken, her skull fractured from behind. Forensics speak. The coroner ruled the cause of death, blunt force trauma to the back of the head. She didn't drive into the swamp. She was placed in the car after death. Her injuries, including defensive wounds, indicated a struggle. Not in the car, outside it. Mud samples collected from the cruiser's floor showed traces of industrial cement dust, suggesting she was first dragged through a site under construction, not the swamp's edge. The vehicle had been slowly pushed into the swamp, possibly by hand, possibly rolled downhill after her body was staged in the front seat. There were no fingerprints, no foreign DNA, no radio. It had been torn out, and strangest of all, no badge. Her police badge was missing, a clue in the water. As the vehicle was being drained, detectives found something lodged under the rear floor mat. A rusted dogered notebook inside, faded pages barely legible but clearly Teresa's handwriting. The last entry read, "If I disappear, check Ray's overtime logs." Something isn't right. The numbers don't match. He told me to drop it. I won't. That name again. Ray Gutierrez, her former partner, the one who said she'd been acting strange. The one with a history of unverified hours. The one who, it turns out, had gone on medical leave one day after Teresa vanished and never returned to duty. A pattern reemerges. With new evidence in hand, investigators reopened internal files from 1979 to 1981, and they found something that had been overlooked. 4 complaints filed anonymously against Ray Gutierrez in 1978, all dismissed, all buried in personnel discretion. The complaints accused him of falsifying shift hours, taking bribes, and once threatening another officer who asked too many questions. That officer was Teresa. The swamp hadn't just buried a car, It had buried a warning and someone had been hoping it would never be pulled back out. Part 3: The Man and the Watchtower. With Teresa's body finally recovered and her journal pointing toward Officer Ray Gutierrez, investigators wasted no time, but there was a problem. Ray Gutierrez had disappeared. Not officially, he was still receiving pension checks, still paying property taxes on a remote cabin in northern Arizona. But no one had seen him in person since 1991. He hadn't responded to letters. His last phone line was disconnected. Even his neighbors hadn't heard from him in years. It was as if, like Teresa Ray, had vanished until someone saw movement at the old Ranger Watchtower, the cabin in the pines. The tower sat just off an unpaved trail on federal land. It had once been used by fire crews but had been abandoned in the late 80s. From there you could see for miles in all directions. No one could sneak up unnoticed. Federal agents approached the structure just after dawn with no lights, no sirens. At 5:42 a.m., Ray Gutierrez stepped out onto the upper platform. He didn't run. He simply said, "I always knew the swamp would talk eventually." The interrogation. Back in custody, Ray looked different, thinner, grayer, sun-damaged, but one thing hadn't changed: his silence. He refused to speak for 3 days. Then during a late-night session with investigators and a recorder running, he broke. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he said. "She was supposed to hand me the journal. I was going to destroy it, that's all." Ray described how Teresa confronted him the day before she vanished about stolen overtime, off-the-book citations, and hush money exchange during traffic stops. She had the records. She had names. She told him she was turning it in. "We met the next morning en route. She was calm, like she already knew I'd been lying. She gave me the notebook. I don't even remember grabbing the jack. He struck her once, maybe twice. She collapsed, and instead of helping her, he panicked." The cover-up. Ray said he loaded Teresa into her own cruiser, removed the radio and badge, drove the vehicle to the swamp's edge, an old hunting path he knew, and rolled it in. It went in fast. "I thought it would sink, that it would be over." He walked 6 miles to a friend's trailer, made up a story about a blown tire, and waited. The search began within hours, and he blended right back into it. For years, he carried her badge in his truck, and every anniversary of her disappearance, he burned a copy of her missing poster in a coffee can. Part 4: The Badge. It was the last piece missing, the badge. Everything else had surfaced. The patrol car, the notebook, the body, even the confession. But badge number 421, Teresa Molina's shield, was never found. For decades, officers and family believed Ray had destroyed it, that maybe he'd thrown it into the swamp, melted it, buried it somewhere she'd never be honored again. But they were wrong. A letter with no stamp. 1 month after Ray Gutierrez's arrest, a brown envelope arrived at the El Paraiso Police Department. No return address, no postage stamp. Inside was a velvet pouch wrapped in red cloth, stained, faded. Inside that cloth, the badge. It had been carefully polished. No scratches, no bends, just 2 words engraved on the back, words no one had ever seen before. "She stayed honest." Attached was a note written in block print. "She was the only one who didn't take the shortcut. Thought you should have this back. A guilty man." Fingerprint testing on the envelope was inconclusive, but investigators believe Ray had mailed it before his arrest as a final silent surrender, the rededication. On May 18, 1995, nearly 16 years to the day after her disappearance, the El Paraiso Police Department held a public ceremony. Hundreds gathered. Her sister Ana spoke. She never raised her voice, never broke the rules, and still they tried to silence her. But the swamp kept her truth. The badge was placed in a custom glass display beneath a new inscription. Officer Teresa Molina, 1945-1979. Integrity doesn't vanish, it surfaces. And from that day on, no officer in El Paraiso was ever issued badge number 421 again. It was retired forever. Part 5: The Ripple. The conviction of Ray Gutierrez and the recovery of Teresa Molina's badge didn't just close a chapter, it opened a new one. Her case, once whispered about, nearly forgotten, became required reading in academy ethics classes across the state of New Mexico. But the story wasn't just about what was found, it was about what had gone unnoticed, what had been buried not by nature but by people, department-wide fallout. In the year following the investigation, an internal audit swept through El Paraiso's police department. Over 60 shift records from the late 70s and early 80s were re-examined. 4 retired officers were questioned. 2 supervisors resigned. 1 former captain was indicted for obstruction. He had knowingly lost the original complaints against Gutierrez. Even outside El Paraiso, departments began to quietly look inward into their own cold cases, their own missing reports. The swamp had spoken, and it forced everyone to listen. The Teresa Act. In 1996, the state legislature passed the Teresa Act, requiring that any missing law enforcement officer's case be investigated by an external agency, not their own department. It also created new standards for evidence storage, digital preservation, and long-term file reviews. Teresa's name, once etched only into silence, was now carved into law, the one unsolved thread. There was, however, one piece that still haunted investigators. In her recovered journal, Teresa had written this: "It's not just Rye, one of them wears the badge with 2 numbers, he's worse." To this day, no one knows what she meant. No badge with 2 numbers was ever found. No second perpetrator was ever identified. Rye never clarified. He died in prison in 1998, still refusing to name anyone else, which leaves one question still open. Was someone else involved, or did the swamp only uncover part of the truth? Final words: Officer Teresa Molina didn't die running. She died resisting, questioning, documenting, and in the end even buried beneath 15 years of mud, lies, and silence. Her story came back because the truth has weight, and the swamp, heavy as it was, couldn't hold it forever. Do you think Teresa's case is fully solved, or do you believe someone else still walks free? Tell us your theory in the comments. And if this story left an imprint, like, subscribe and ring the bell.